The deeper Charlie hiked, the quieter the forest became. Birdsong fell away, replaced by the rhythmic crunch of boots on dead leaves. Even the wind seemed to avoid Gideon's hollow. Trees leaned toward the trail like crooked sentinels, their trunks scarred with age and weather. At one point, Charlie noticed a rusted horseshoe nailed into a tree, upside down. A ward? A warning? By midday he found the old signpost half-rotted and overtaken by ivy. The lettering had faded, but if he squinted he could just make out the word Gideon. Beneath it someone had carved a single phrase, "What is gathered does not return." The trail vanished after that. He relied on instinct and the map's vague indicators, climbing down slick rock ledges and navigating overgrown switchbacks until the forest dropped away into a hollow shaped like a bowl. The air changed the moment he stepped in, cooler, heavier. It smelled faintly of mildew and iron. At the center of the hollow stood a stone archway, barely taller than Charlie's shoulders. It looked like the remnants of an old smokehouse or root cellar, but there were no other ruins nearby. Just the arch, and beneath it, a flat circle of soil completely devoid of plant life. Charlie approached slowly, noting the symbols carved into the keystone, loops, stitches, spindles. They matched the ones from his grandfather's folder. This was it, the last known site. The place the Ragpicker had once been stopped, or nearly. He stepped inside the ring. The shift was immediate, a faint pressure on his eardrums like he'd stepped into a vacuum. The forest fell away, though he hadn't moved. The world narrowed to silence and shadow, and then he heard it. A soft, papery sound like fabric being folded over and over again. It echoed from beneath the soil. Charlie knelt and brushed the dirt aside. Just beneath the surface, stitched into the ground itself, was cloth. Not just one piece, layers, threads woven into loam, names embroidered in red along the seams. He jerked his hand back, heart pounding. The cloth moved, not by wind, not by touch. It shifted on its own, rippling in slow, deliberate undulations. And then something beneath the stitched surface let out a breath, a long, shivering exhale that smelled like old cedar and wet wool. Charlie stumbled backward out of the ring, nearly losing his footing as the breath of that thing, whatever lived beneath the stitched ground, followed him like a fog. His mouth went dry. His hands trembled. He had come expecting clues, maybe an old relic, a trail to follow. But this was alive. He stood frozen just outside the circle, trying to reason through the pounding in his chest. The air was still and thick. No birds, no breeze. Just the muffled hum of something ancient turning beneath the soil. He forced himself to breathe, counting it out like his therapist had taught him years ago. In. Hold. Out. Again. Then he saw the figure. Across the hollow beyond the archway, it stood half-hidden in the shadows of a dying birch. Its shape was barely more than suggestion, tall but bent, draped in patchwork robes that trailed into the moss. No face. Just a hint of motion where a head should have been. And those eyes. Patient. Watching. Charlie blinked, and it was gone. He didn't call out. Didn't run. He turned back the way he came, forcing himself to walk slowly, even though every instinct screamed to flee. He climbed out of the hollow, retracing his steps to the horseshoe tree, then to the collapsed fence line that marked the edge of his grandfather's old hunting trail. It wasn't until he reached his truck that he realized something was clenched in his fist. A strip of cloth, no longer than a bookmark. He hadn't remembered picking it up. The fabric was soft but dense, dyed with earth and blood. Along its edge was a name, stitched with uncanny precision in thread the color of rust. Charles Rowe. He stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to keep it or burn it. In the end, he slipped it into a plastic bag and shoved it deep into his glove box. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cloth moving beneath the earth, heard the sound of folding, relentless and slow. And once, just before dawn, he woke to the faint sound of something brushing against the window screen. Not scratching, not tapping, sewing. Charlie didn't open the curtains. He just sat there in the dark, holding the hunting knife from his grandfather's cellar and listening. The sound had stopped hours ago, or maybe minutes. It was hard to tell anymore. Time felt like a frayed edge now, unraveling at the seams. He finally slept just after sunrise, and when he woke, the world looked normal again. Sunlight cut across the floor, birds sang in the trees. There was no sign of disturbance at the window. Nothing unusual in the yard. But he still checked every inch of the house, room by room, flashlight in hand and nerves coiled tight. Downstairs, the Ragpicker file remained where he'd left it on the table. The fabric strip with his name was still sealed in the bag. He sat down slowly, flipping through the folder again, this time with more care. There were names he didn't recognize, dozens of them. Many were followed by case numbers, dates, even handwritten notes. Some had sketches of the stitched figure in various poses, all consistent in one detail. It never walked. It glided, or floated, or bent space around it the way a flame might shift without moving. One page stopped him cold. It was a photocopy of a letter from 1973. His grandfather's name was at the bottom, typed beneath a crude government seal. Subject continues to collect. Behavioral patterns suggest selective targeting based on trauma imprint. Survivors describe feelings of guilt, memory erosion, or emotional tethering. Incidents cluster near neglected boundaries, rural dumps, condemned alleys, border woods. At the bottom, scribbled in red, it doesn't kill, it takes. Charlie stared at the words until they blurred. Then he flipped the page. There, pressed between two clear sheets of laminate, was another strip of cloth. This one was blackened with soot and partially shredded at the edges. Its label had almost faded away. But not enough. It read, Cara Rowe. Charlie's breath caught. He reached for it, then pulled his hand back. A knot formed in his chest, sharp and heavy. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in months. Not since the search was called off. Not since everyone told him to let go. But the Ragpicker hadn't. Charlie took the strip labelled Cara Rowe and held it under the light. The stitching was delicate, hand-done, like every other label in the file. Each thread formed with care, precision, reverence, almost. This wasn't just a trophy. It was something else. A record, a ritual. He laid it on the table beside his own and sat there in silence, mind spinning. If the Ragpicker had this, it meant Cara wasn't missing the way the police said. She hadn't drowned. She hadn't run. She'd been taken, unseen, unnoticed, like hundreds before her, sewn into something larger. He pulled out the topographical maps from the folder. Dozens of small red X's marked sites across the state, dumps, ruins, abandoned lots. He scanned until he found one that matched the hollow in the woods, labelled Site 43B. In the margin, active, avoid nighttime visitation, second presence suspected. Second presence. He read the phrase again and again, then scanned the rest of the maps. Site 43B wasn't alone. There were others within 50 miles, some marked dormant, others tagged vigilant. Whatever that meant. Charlie picked one, Site 39D. A decommissioned textile mill outside Elbridge, shuttered since 1989. He circled it on the map and started packing. Flashlight, camera, knife, gloves, the whole file. Anything that might help him document it. Prove it, or stop it. But as he reached to grab the strip with Cara's name again, something shifted. His grandfather's photo on the shelf, an old hunting shot, fell flat to the floor. No wind, no vibration. Just fell. Charlie walked over slowly, picking it up. The glass was unbroken, the frame intact. But something was different. Behind the photo, tucked into the backing, was a folded note. Faded, yellowed, almost brittle. It read, "If you're reading this, it means you've seen it. Don't follow it. Don't speak to it. If it takes someone, they are part of it now. To retrieve them is to be claimed." Charlie stared at the words for a long time. Then he looked at Cara's cloth strip again, her name stitched so perfectly. He shoved it into his coat pocket and whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandad. I'm not letting her go." Charlie stood at the edge of the forest near Site 43B as dusk settled, shadows stretching long between the trees. The air was thick with a silence that felt almost unnatural, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, feeling the weight of the file and equipment pressing against his back, a tangible reminder of the path he had chosen. He glanced at the crumpled note from his grandfather once more, the warning echoing in his mind. But the thought of Cara stitched into that collection, trapped and lost, pushed him forward. The path into the hollow was narrow and overgrown, thorns scraping at his sleeves as he moved deeper. An eerie stillness enveloped the area, no birdsong, no rustling leaves, only the distant hum of insects and the soft crunch of his boots on dead leaves. As he ventured further, Charlie noticed faint remnants of discarded belongings scattered on the ground, tattered pieces of fabric, broken toys, fragments of old clothing. Each item seemed carefully placed, almost deliberate, as if marking a trail or a boundary. A chill ran down his spine. Suddenly a whisper floated through the trees, a voice, barely audible, calling his name. It was soft, familiar, impossibly close, yet just out of reach. Charlie. He froze, heart pounding. The voice was like Kara's, gentle, pleading, but also warped, distant, echoing from some unseen place. Charlie. He gripped his flashlight tighter, shining the beam into the dense underbrush, but there was nothing there. Charlie. The voice came again, clearer this time, layered with a sadness that clawed at his resolve. He swallowed hard, knowing this was exactly what the Ragpicker used to lure its victims, echoes of the lost, shadows of the gone. But this time, Charlie wasn't alone. He wasn't just following a whisper, he had a purpose, and he was ready to face whatever waited in the shadows. The deeper Charlie stepped into the hollow, the heavier the silence became, as if the woods were pressing in around him. His flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating twisted roots and jagged rocks, but nothing moved except the cold breath of the night air. The voice came again, soft, distant, but unmistakably Kara's. Charlie. His breath hitched. Each time it spoke, the forest seemed to shift subtly. A rustling shadow here, a faint shimmer of light there, but always just beyond his reach. He stopped and called out, "Kara, is that you?" No answer, only the whispering wind. The weight in his chest tightened. The longer he stayed, the more he felt the presence, an ancient patient watcher, unseen but ever present. His skin prickled as he noticed something new. Small pieces of fabric fluttering gently from branches, sewn together by invisible hands, forming delicate tapestries hanging like ghostly curtains. Each scrap was faded, frayed, the remnants of lives once lived. He realized with a sinking heart that these were the collected fragments, woven together by the Ragpicker, each telling a story of loss and memory. He reached out to touch one, fingers trembling, when suddenly a chill swept through the hollow, a breath colder than winter. Behind him, the voice whispered again, more insistent. "Charlie." He spun around, heart pounding, but the shadows held only silence. And yet, he knew the Ragpicker was close, watching, waiting, sowing its next tale into the endless collection. The forest around Charlie seemed to close in tighter as he ventured deeper into the hollow, each step stirring fallen leaves that whispered secrets beneath his boots. The patchwork tapestries of fabric swayed gently in the cold air, their threads catching the faint beam of his flashlight, casting eerie, flickering shadows on the gnarled trees. A faint scent of earth and decay mingled with something else. Old cloth, faintly musty, as if the fabrics themselves held the weight of forgotten memories. Charlie's breath formed pale clouds in the chilled air as he pressed onward, the silence pressing heavily against his ears. He was acutely aware of the unsettling sensation that he was being observed, not just by something unseen, but by the very fabric of the forest itself. Suddenly, the whisper came again, barely audible, but unmistakably close. "Charlie." His heart slammed in his chest. He spun toward the sound, eyes scanning the darkness, but only the shifting shadows responded. The voice came once more, layered and overlapping now. Voices of others lost in these woods, calling names, telling fragments of stories, laughter twisted by fear. Charlie realized then that the Ragpicker was not just a collector of things, but a weaver of lives, stitching together the remnants of those it stalked, preserving their echoes in the delicate threads that surrounded him. He swallowed hard, knowing that to leave was to abandon these lost souls, but to stay meant risking becoming part of the endless collection. Charlie's hands trembled as he reached out to touch one of the delicate fabric tapestries hanging from a low branch. The threads were rough and brittle beneath his fingers, each stitch uneven but purposeful, as though sewn by a hand both meticulous and weary. Patterns emerged, shapes resembling faces, names embroidered faintly in faded ink, fragments of faded photographs sewn into the weave. He traced a name, Maggie. A shiver ran through him. The whispering voices swirled around him, overlapping in a mournful chorus. He caught fleeting phrases, memories of laughter, arguments, regrets, all woven into the tapestry of loss that the Ragpicker collected. Charlie's mind raced as he pieced together the horror of what this creature truly was. Not merely a hunter, but a curator of sorrow, a silent witness preserving the remnants of those it ensnared. His gaze drifted upward, and through the tangled branches, moonlight spilled down like a pale spotlight onto a clearing ahead. In the centre, a mound of discarded belongings, clothes, trinkets, toys, piled high, stitched and woven into grotesque patterns. There, at the heart of it all, a figure hunched low, its back turned. The ragged robes shifted and fluttered in the wind, stitched with countless scraps of fabric. Its presence radiated a chilling stillness, both ancient and unknowable. Charlie's breath caught. He knew he had found the Ragpicker's lair. Charlie stepped cautiously into the clearing, every nerve screaming to flee, but something rooted him in place, a mixture of dread and grim determination. The figure before him remained motionless, its sewn-together robes whispering softly in the night breeze, as if breathing with a life of their own. He swallowed his fear and spoke, voice barely a whisper. "I know what you are, what you do." The creature shifted, the ragged fabric rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. Slowly it turned, revealing a face that was not quite human, a patchwork of worn skin, faded cloth, and glinting black eyes that held centuries of sorrow and patience. The Ragpicker's gaze met Charlie's, and in that moment a flood of images surged through his mind. Lives lost and forgotten, moments stitched together like a tapestry of pain and remembrance. The creature was not just a collector, it was a keeper of stories, a guardian of memories no one else dared to hold. Charlie's heart pounded as he understood the terrible truth. To face the Ragpicker was to confront the weight of every lost soul it had gathered, and to risk becoming part of that endless weave. With a final shiver, he turned away, knowing that some stories are better left unfinished, some memories better left unstitched. But as he retreated into the shadows, the whisper followed him, soft, patient, and unyielding, a reminder that the Ragpicker's reach was far longer than any could imagine. Charlie's footsteps echoed softly against the worn wooden floor of the cabin as he returned, the weight of what he had witnessed pressing heavily on his chest. Outside, the forest remained still, the night quiet but for the distant hoot of an owl. He sat at the battered table, pulling the ragged map from his jacket. His fingers traced the faded lines, searching for meaning in the maze of paths and forgotten trails. The Ragpicker's lair had been marked, if only in his mind, a place where the lost converged, stitched together in a tapestry of sorrow. His thoughts swirled with unanswered questions. How long had the creature been here, collecting remnants of forgotten lives? How many had been lost to its silent weaving? And was there any way to stop it? Or was it an inevitable thread in the fabric of the world itself? Charlie reached for the worn notebook he had brought, flipping to the page filled with sketches and notes. Each entry seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if the stories of those trapped within the Ragpicker's collection whispered from the very pages. Outside, a cold wind stirred the trees, carrying with it a faint, haunting melody, a song woven from the voices of the lost, calling out through the night, urging Charlie to listen, to remember, to never forget. Charlie stared into the flickering flame of the small lantern, shadows dancing across the walls like restless spirits. The wind's mournful song lingered at the edges of his hearing, a haunting reminder of the Ragpicker's reach beyond the forest. He pulled his coat tighter around him and opened the notebook again. Among the scattered sketches, one image caught his eye, a tapestry unlike the others, more intricate and detailed. Threads of silver and midnight blue intertwined with faded reds and browns, forming shapes that shimmered as if alive. Beneath it, a note in his grandfather's hurried handwriting, "The Weaver's Loom, where stories begin and end." A chill ran down Charlie's spine. The Weaver's Loom. The name alone felt ancient, powerful. Somewhere deep in these woods, beyond the Ragpicker's lair, lay a place where the very fabric of memory and existence was woven, a place that might hold answers, or perhaps something far darker. He closed the notebook with a snap, resolve hardening in his eyes. He had to find the loom, not just for himself, but for all the lost souls the Ragpicker had sewn into its endless tapestry, because some threads, once pulled, could unravel everything. Charlie packed his gear with deliberate care, the weight of each item reminding him of the journey ahead. He folded the worn notebook and tucked it safely into his backpack, alongside a sturdy rope, a flashlight with extra batteries, and a small first aid kit. The cold air of dawn seeped through the cabin's cracks, mingling with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Before stepping outside, he paused, glancing once more at the faded map spread across the table. The path to the weaver's loom was unclear, just a smattering of cryptic markings and barely legible notes, but it was a direction, a beacon in the fog of uncertainty. As he stepped into the forest, the trees seemed to close behind him, their gnarled branches whispering secrets long buried. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft crunch of leaves beneath his boots. Every now and then a fleeting shadow would flicker at the edge of his vision, but when he turned, nothing remained but the rustling canopy overhead. Charlie knew the Ragpicker's presence was never far, a silent observer weaving its tapestry in the darkness. Determined yet wary, he pressed deeper into the woods, each step carrying him closer to the loom, and deeper into the unknown. The forest grew denser as Charlie ventured further, the sunlight barely piercing the thick canopy above. The air was heavy with the scent of moss and earth, damp and alive with the subtle hum of unseen creatures. Every sound seemed amplified, the snap of a twig, the distant call of a crow, each one setting his nerves on edge. He paused beside a twisted oak, its bark scarred with deep grooves that resembled faint symbols. Reaching out, he traced the lines with his fingers, recalling the notes from his grandfather's notebook. The markings were deliberate, perhaps a crude map or warning left by those who came before. A faint breeze stirred, carrying with it a whisper so soft he almost missed it. The voice was familiar yet elusive, shifting like smoke, a gentle call of a name long forgotten, a beckoning to follow deeper into the shadows. Charlie swallowed hard, his heart pounding. The Ragpicker was near, weaving its presence through the very air around him. But he had come too far to turn back now. He adjusted his pack and pressed onward, every step a careful dance between hope and dread, searching for the weaver's loom, hidden somewhere within the tangled depths of the Appalachian wilderness. The undergrowth thickened, and Charlie's path became less distinct. His boots tangled in exposed roots, and branches clawed at his sleeves as he pushed forward. The forest felt alive, watchful, almost sentient, as if the trees themselves were aware of his intrusion. He stopped at a clearing, bathed in a pale, eerie light that seemed out of place among the muted greens and browns. In the center stood a colossal ancient tree, its trunk wide and twisted, roots sprawling like veins into the earth. The air around it shimmered faintly, distorting the space like a heat haze. Charlie approached cautiously, his breath shallow. At the base of the tree, woven among the roots, were strips of fabric, some faded, others vibrant, tangled with fragments of paper, photographs, and tiny trinkets. The remnants of lives lost, stitched together in a patchwork of memory and grief. He knelt, fingers trembling as he touched a piece of thread that seemed to pulse with a quiet energy. This was the weaver's loom, the heart of the Ragpicker's domain, where the threads of countless souls were gathered and woven into an endless tapestry. A sudden rustle broke the silence. Charlie's head snapped up, eyes scanning the shadowed edges of the clearing. Somewhere, just beyond the trees, something watched, patient, unseen, waiting. Charlie held his breath, every muscle tense as his eyes darted through the shadows. The forest around him seemed to close in, silence pressing down like a heavy shroud. Then, from the gloom, a faint movement, a flicker of ragged fabric caught on a branch, swaying gently in the still air. His mind raced, piecing together what he'd learned, what he'd felt since following the trail. The Ragpicker wasn't just a creature, it was something ancient, a collector not of things but of stories, memories, and the very essence of people. It wove its tapestry from loss and longing, pulling threads from the forgotten and the broken. Charlie took a cautious step back, careful not to disturb the fragile arrangement at the tree's roots. His fingers brushed a weathered photograph, smiling faces frozen in happier times. Somewhere in the distance, the whisper of fabric brushing against wood echoed faintly, like a soft sigh. The air shifted, and for a moment Charlie thought he heard a voice, not his own, not quite human, a murmured plea, or perhaps a warning. He swallowed hard and gripped his flashlight tighter. There was no turning back now. Whatever this was, he was entwined in its story, a thread pulled taut in the ragpicker's endless loom. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Charlie steadied himself, eyes straining to pierce the thickening dusk. Shadows twisted between the trees, elongating like dark fingers reaching for him. The wind carried distant echoes, snatches of laughter, fragmented voices, a child's cry, faint and haunting, yet impossible to locate. His mind churned with fragmented memories, blending with the ethereal sounds around him. The ragpicker's presence was a creeping weight, a quiet force that seeped into the very fabric of the woods. It wasn't just a predator, it was a curator of sorrow, weaving the discarded remnants of lives into its silent gallery. Charlie's fingers brushed the worn fabric strips again, feeling the coarse weave beneath his fingertips. Each piece told a story, a life interrupted, a secret buried, a memory lost to time. The deeper he delved, the heavier the air became with unseen grief. Suddenly, a soft rustling came from behind a nearby thicket. Charlie froze, heart hammering. The ragged shape of the ragpicker emerged slowly into the clearing, a hunched figure draped in patchwork cloth, its face hidden beneath a tangle of burlap and shadow. But it was the eyes that held him. The endless, patient black voids, reflecting 1,000 unspoken stories. The creature moved with deliberate grace, weaving closer, its every step pulling at the threads of Charlie's own past, threatening to entwine him forever. Charlie's breath hitched as the ragpicker's presence filled the clearing, the creature's silhouette blending almost seamlessly with the shifting shadows. He wanted to run, to turn and flee back through the trees, but his feet felt rooted, trapped by a mix of fear and fascination. The ragpicker extended a gnarled hand, fingers wrapped in worn fabric strips, reaching not to harm but to offer, an old, faded patch from a jacket Charlie recognized instantly. It was his father's. Memories flooded him, fragments of a childhood long buried beneath years of silence and grief, the warmth of a father's embrace, the sting of a lost goodbye. The ragpicker wasn't just collecting random scraps, it was weaving his history, threading him into its tapestry. "Why?" Charlie whispered, voice barely audible. The creature's eyes seemed to glisten, as if understanding, though no words came. The forest around them pulsed with a quiet urgency, as if urging Charlie to choose, succumb to the pull of the ragpicker's loom, or fight to reclaim his own frayed story. He stepped back slowly, heart pounding, mind racing. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him knew this was only the beginning. Charlie swallowed the lump in his throat and forced his feet to move, stepping backward away from the ragpicker's outstretched hand. Each step was heavy, laden with the weight of everything he was beginning to understand, and everything he feared losing. The creature's presence felt less like a threat now, and more like a solemn invitation to confront the past he had long tried to bury. As the ragpicker faded back into the shadows, the whispers of the forest seemed to quiet, leaving an eerie stillness in their wake. Charlie's eyes darted around the clearing, searching for any sign that the being might return or follow. But all that remained were the remnants of the night, fallen leaves, a scattering of fabric strips caught on branches, and the fading glow of moonlight filtering through the canopy. He pulled his jacket tighter, the cold seeping through, and turned toward the path leading back to civilization. Each step felt tentative, like navigating a bridge between the living world and the intangible threads woven by the ragpicker. In his mind, questions churned relentlessly. What exactly did the creature want? Was it punishment, redemption, or something far more complex? Charlie knew that escaping this night would not be enough. He would have to face the shadows the ragpicker had uncovered, both in the woods and within himself. The night pressed on, but Charlie's journey was far from over. Charlie's return to Crayfield was a blur of motion and half-formed thoughts. The town's familiar streets, dimly lit and quiet, felt both comforting and alien after the weight of the forest's secrets. He kept the fabric strips and sketches hidden beneath his jacket, a tangible reminder of what lurked beyond the edge of the woods. At home, the silence was oppressive. The walls seemed to close in, holding their own echoes of loss and regret. Charlie sat at the kitchen table, pulling out the faded papers one by one, tracing names and dates, piecing together the Ragpicker's unseen tapestry. Each thread told a story, people forgotten by time but stitched back into existence through the creature's haunting craft. He realized the Ragpicker wasn't simply a monster to fear. It was a guardian of forgotten souls, an ancient weaver of memory and pain. But why did it choose some and leave others untouched? What was its ultimate purpose? As dawn crept in through the curtains, Charlie's resolve hardened. He couldn't let the Ragpicker's story remain buried in shadows. There were others like him, those touched, haunted, or changed by encounters they couldn't explain. And maybe, just maybe, together they could unravel the creature's secrets before more lives were woven into its endless collection. Charlie began reaching out cautiously, starting with local forums and obscure online groups dedicated to strange encounters and unexplained phenomena. He posted cryptic messages about a collector of memories, a shadow that haunted forgotten places, hoping to connect with others who had glimpsed the Ragpicker or felt its eerie presence. Responses trickled in, some skeptical, some terrified, others oddly familiar. Stories of missing persons, unexplained disappearances, and strange figures lurking in alleys surfaced, painting a patchwork of experiences that echoed the fragments Charlie had uncovered in his grandfather's cellar. Among the messages, one stood out. A brief, coded note from someone calling themselves the Weaver. They claimed to have knowledge of the Ragpicker's origins and warned Charlie to be careful, hinting at dangers beyond what he had yet imagined. The days stretched into restless nights as Charlie grappled with a growing sense of urgency. The Ragpicker's threads were pulling tighter, weaving a story that was far from finished, and he was caught in its tangled web. The message from the Weaver contained coordinates leading to an abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of a nearby town, a place whispered about in local legends but long forgotten by most. Charlie knew this could be the next piece of the puzzle, the hidden chapter where the Ragpicker's story might reveal itself more clearly. He prepared carefully, gathering supplies and mapping the route. The sun was dipping low when he arrived, the mill looming like a crumbling relic swallowed by creeping vines and rusted metal. The air smelled of dust and decay, thick with the ghosts of industry long past. Inside, shafts of fading light filtered through broken windows, illuminating piles of discarded fabric and tangled machinery. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of settling wood and the distant drip of water. Charlie moved cautiously, his footsteps echoing against the hollow walls. As he explored, he found scraps of cloth pinned to walls and caught on beams, fragments that matched the fabric strips he had found in his grandfather's files. The atmosphere thickened, a sense of being watched prickling at the back of his neck. Then, from the shadows, a soft, deliberate voice whispered his name, gentle yet chilling. Charlie froze, heart pounding, as the Ragpicker stepped forward from the gloom, no longer just a figure of fear, but a guide woven from threads of memory and truth. Charlie's breath hitched as the Ragpicker emerged from the shadows, its form shifting like a patchwork quilt of forgotten lives. The stitched robes fluttered as if caught in an unseen breeze, and its eyes, deep, patient, and impossibly old, locked onto his. "You've come far," the creature murmured, voice like fabric unraveling. "But understanding requires more than courage. It demands sacrifice." Charlie swallowed hard, the weight of countless stories pressing down on him. "What are you?" he asked, voice barely steady. "A keeper of what was lost," it replied. "I gather what the world forgets, memories, remnants, echoes of those who fade from time. I weave their essence into a tapestry that endures." The air grew thick with the scent of aged cloth and dust. Charlie felt the pull of the Ragpicker's purpose, an ancient duty to preserve, yet also a curse binding it to the margins of existence. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. "To see, to remember, to carry the story forward, for without witnesses even I unravel." Charlie stepped closer, the ragged edges of the ragpicker's form seeming to ripple with every movement. He reached out tentatively, fingertips grazing the worn fabric that seemed both real and unreal, a living mosaic of stitched memories. "I don't know if I can do that," Charlie admitted, voice cracking. "I'm just one person. How can I carry all those stories?" The ragpicker's eyes softened. "You won't carry them alone. There are others, seekers, witnesses, those touched by loss and curiosity. The threads weave through many lives, binding a community unseen but unbroken." A sudden chill swept through the mill, as if the building itself inhaled a long-forgotten breath. Shadows flickered and shifted, shapes emerging briefly at the edges of Charlie's vision. Faces, fragments of moments long past. "They are all here," the ragpicker said. "Every discarded thread, every forgotten soul. I gather their essence so they may never be truly lost." Charlie's heart pounded. The weight of the unseen stories pressed on him, yet beneath it all, a strange comfort stirred. He wasn't alone in this. "Weaving the past into the present," Charlie whispered, "keeping memories alive." The ragpicker inclined its head. "Exactly. And your story is now part of the fabric." Charlie blinked, the room seeming to tilt as the ragpicker's presence enveloped him like a warm, threadbare cloak. The whispered faces around him grew clearer, snatches of laughter, cries, quiet moments frozen in time, each one a stitch in the endless tapestry the creature maintained. "Why me?" Charlie asked, voice barely audible. "Because you remember," the ragpicker replied softly. "Because you seek truth in the forgotten corners. Because even as the world rushes forward, there must be those who honor what came before." A sense of peace settled over Charlie, mingled with the weight of responsibility. The ragged figure extended a hand, its touch both rough and gentle, like worn fabric softened by age. "Walk with me," it invited. Together they moved deeper into the mill's shadowed heart, where threads of past and present intertwined, and the stories of the lost were stitched forever into the night. As they walked, Charlie felt the air thick with memories, each step echoing with the voices of those long gone, yet never truly forgotten. The ragpicker led him through winding corridors woven from shadows and light, where fragments of lives hung like faded tapestries on the walls. "This place," Charlie murmured, "it's a sanctuary for the lost." "In a way," the ragpicker answered, "a refuge where forgotten stories find a home. Each piece I collect, each thread I sew, preserves a fragment of humanity's soul." Charlie paused before a wall covered in delicate fabric strips, each labelled with names, dates and places, reminders of lives touched by time and absence. His fingers traced one strip, feeling the subtle pulse beneath the surface. Can these memories be shared? Can others find them? Only through those willing to remember, to listen. The tapestry grows not just with threads, but with witnesses. You are one of them now. A quiet determination settled in Charlie's heart. The ragpicker wasn't just a collector of remnants, it was a guardian of legacies, and Charlie had become part of its endless weave. The deeper they ventured, the heavier the air became with unspoken stories. Charlie's thoughts swirled with images of the people whose lives had been touched, changed, or ended by the ragpicker's silent presence. Faces blurred and merged, but their essence lingered like a faint fragrance, lingering just beyond reach. "What happens to those you collect?" Charlie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They live on in the threads," the ragpicker said. "Not as ghosts, but as echoes, pieces of the past woven into the fabric of the present. Through remembrance they find meaning beyond oblivion." Charlie thought of his own losses, the fragments of his past he had tried to bury. Now, surrounded by this living archive, those memories seemed less like wounds and more like connections, a vast, intricate network of shared experience. "Is there an end to the sewing?" Charlie questioned. The ragpicker shook its head slowly. "No. As long as people forget, I will gather. As long as stories fade, I will mend. It is a never-ending task, but one that gives purpose to what might otherwise be lost." Charlie nodded, feeling the weight of that eternal duty settle on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a calling. Charlie glanced back toward the dimly lit entrance of the mill, the fading daylight casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. The ragpicker's presence beside him was a stark contrast to the quiet loneliness he'd felt for so long. Here in this place, stitched together by memory and loss, he sensed a fragile hope. "Will others understand?" he asked, the question hanging between them like a thread waiting to be woven. "They will, in time," the Ragpicker replied. "Not everyone is ready to face what lies beneath their world, but those who seek will find. The tapestry is vast, and each thread has its place." Charlie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his journey and the path ahead. He was no longer alone in his search, no longer just a man haunted by the past. He was a keeper of stories, a witness to the unseen. As the first stars began to glimmer through the cracked windows, Charlie made a silent promise: to honor the memories, to listen to the whispers woven into the fabric of forgotten alleys and rural dumps, and to never forget. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the faint rustling of fabric and the distant hum of the night settling outside. Charlie's mind drifted back to the moments before, the discoveries, the questions, the unsettling realization that some stories are stitched not just from cloth, but from sorrow and resilience. "Do you ever tire?" Charlie asked softly. "Of gathering, of sewing, of carrying so much weight?" The Ragpicker's form seemed to shift slightly, as if considering the question deeply. "I am timeless," it said. "What may be weariness to a human is simply the rhythm of my existence. I am bound to this task, and it is bound to me. Together, we endure." Charlie nodded, a strange comfort settling in his chest. There was an odd grace in the Ragpicker's eternal duty, a reminder that even in darkness there is purpose, and even in loss there is meaning. As the night deepened, Charlie felt the threads of the past intertwine with his own, weaving a fragile connection that promised to hold, even when all else seemed to unravel. Charlie traced a finger along the edge of one of the fabric strips, the delicate threads whispering secrets of lives long gone. Each piece was more than just cloth. It was a story, a fragment of a person's existence, captured and preserved by the Ragpicker's unyielding vigilance. "Have you ever lost one?" Charlie asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and sorrow. The Ragpicker's eyes, dark and patient, met his. Sometimes threads fray beyond repair, memories fade when people stop remembering, and in those moments a piece is lost to the void. But even then, the remnants ripple through the tapestry, influencing those who still hold the stories close. Charlie swallowed hard, the weight of forgetting settling heavily on him. The idea that forgetting could unravel lives, that absence could echo louder than presence, was both terrifying and profoundly human. He realized then that his own memories, the pain he carried, and the stories he sought to preserve were all part of a delicate balance, one that could only be maintained through vigilance, remembrance, and above all, connection. Charlie leaned back against the worn wooden wall, the faded light casting long shadows across the room. What happens to those who don't remember, to the ones whose stories fade away? The Ragpicker's gaze darkened, its form seeming to ripple like loose fabric in a breeze. They become lost threads, frayed and severed from the tapestry. Their essence drifts unseen and unheard, until something or someone pulls them back, weaving them anew. But often they remain forgotten, swallowed by the silence. A heavy silence settled between them, thick with unspoken fears and the fragility of memory. Charlie felt the profound loneliness that came with fading into nothingness, a fate worse than any physical harm. "Is there a way to save them?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "The way is to remember," the Ragpicker said, "to tell the stories, to keep the memories alive. As long as even one person remembers, the thread holds. That is the true power we carry." The room seemed to grow colder as Charlie absorbed the Ragpicker's words. He glanced down at the worn fabric strips again, realizing they weren't just relics. They were lifelines. Each one connected a person to a past, to a family, to a world that might otherwise vanish completely. "I don't want to forget," Charlie murmured. "Not anymore." The Ragpicker nodded slowly, its movements deliberate and slow. "Then you must become a keeper of stories. Not just for yourself, but for those who cannot speak, who have been silenced by time and neglect." Charlie felt the weight of that responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. It was daunting, but somehow necessary, an act of defiance against oblivion. "I will," he promised. I'll carry their stories, sew them together like you do." The ragpicker's form softened, almost like a sigh of relief. "Then you have taken the first step. The threads of the past are in your hands now. Guard them well." Charlie stood slowly, the weight of the fabric strips heavy in his hands. Outside, the first light of dawn crept through the cracks of the cabin walls, casting pale gold across the dusty floor. He felt a strange mixture of resolve and sadness, knowing the path ahead would be long and lonely. As he turned to leave the cellar, the ragpicker's shadow lingered behind him, a silent companion bound by the threads they now shared. The journey to preserve forgotten lives had only just begun. Charlie stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the weight of the past settled firmly on his shoulders. The woods around the cabin were quiet, but in that silence he could almost hear the faint whisper of stories waiting to be told, voices long lost, waiting for someone to remember. He clutched the strips of fabric tightly, each one a fragile link to a life once lived, a memory that refused to fade completely. Somewhere out there, others like him were searching, piecing together fragments, fighting the quiet erasure of time. And as the sun climbed higher, casting light over the fading shadows, Charlie knew one thing with certainty. He would not let those threads unravel, not while he still breathed.